This is No Talking in the Library, Mentor Public Library's media podcast where we talk about movies, TV, comic books, pretty much anything we find interesting. Hi, I'm Meredith.
And I'm John.
And I'm Marilyn.
And we're coming at you from Burnside today.
We're coming at you from Babs and Frankie's apartment in Burnside. We just had an awesome party.
Yeah, so as you might have guessed from what's been said so far, our theme today is going to be Batgirl. Particularly, originally we thought what we were going to do is things that should have been good but weren't, or things that we had every reason to expect would be good but weren't. And one of the things that Meredith and I particularly ended up talking about was Batgirl and Batman and some of the comics that have gone on around those two characters. So we thought, as we went about it more, that we would make Batman the theme, because there's so much of it, or Batgirl, Bat things. There's so much of it that we like, but so much of it that we really hate.
So what we're going to call this is Gotham City discussion. Anything that may, happen in Gotham is what we're going to be talking about today.
And there's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a very active city.
I guess the first thing probably that we should start out with is the thing that's going on. So there's the movies, Batman vs. Superman, we're not really going to talk about, because if you've seen it, probably you've had your soul destroyed by 3 hours of Zack Snyder loveliness.
We don't need to rehash that.
Yeah.
We like you guys. We don't want to upset you.
I think it's all for the best that we don't go into that. But the thing that a lot of people have been watching is Gotham, the TV show that airs on Fox. And it's been airing since 2014. It's third season now. And it was, in a way, a kind of amalgamation of a couple of different ideas. It was originally, I think it was meant to be the sort of origin story for Jim Gordon, the police chief of Gotham City. And they also wanted it to be the sort of origin story of Bruce Wayne. And you don't kind of see the sort of Bruce Wayne, the lost years very often, what it was like for him after his parents got killed, and get presented a lot of times with a story that sort of his parents got killed and then he went on this sort of path that led him to become a masked superhero or a masked hero. But then apparently somewhere in the development process they decided that just wasn't enough. So they crossed it or hybridized it with a comic series that had gone on about 10 years previously, 10 or 12 years previously, called Gotham Central, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But Gotham, the TV show, is essentially about James Gordon is a young police officer. He's played by Ben McKenzie, who some of you may remember from the TV show Southland from a few years ago. He's not, probably ever going to win an Oscar or an Emmy as the most blindingly awesome actor in the world, but he's okay in this.
Oh, that's harsh.
I think of him from the OC.
That's
Don't
what
you?
that's what I was thinking of.
That's true.
Teenage me was like, oh yeah, he was in the OC.
Yeah, there's another good reference point. It's got a lot of characters. They've been sort of adding in characters as it's gone on to kind of make it the sort of prequel of Batman Gotham City. So there's Harvey Bullock, the kind of hard-nosed detective, and Oswald Cobblepot, who eventually becomes Penguin, and Selina Kyle, who eventually becomes Catwoman. And it's meant to be a kind of dark, gritty, it's kind of a cross between sort of CW-type superhero TV and a police procedural. And unfortunately, it doesn't quite make it on either one of those bases, really.
That's my biggest problem with it. I've watched a couple of episodes, and at least in the beginning, it can't decide whether it wants to be campy Batman 66 or it wants to be The Shield and a show about police corruption, because you've got both things happening. So you've got villains tying weather balloons to corrupt DAs and floating them up into the sky, and then you'll have a scene following it where Harvey Bullock is threatening a suspect, and it's just like, what am I watching?
And I guess for me, it's so very different than a lot of the other DC shows that we're seeing right now, and I like that about the DC shows, the other ones, that they're a lot brighter and happier and much more fun, and they have a musical episode, and this one is so dark. I watched the first episode and I was like, no, I have other DC shows that I would much rather be watching. If I need dark, I can go to the movies.
Well, it's true, and it's very different tonally from the Greg Berlanti shows that are on the CW, The Flash, and Arrow and Supergirl and Legends of Tomorrow. And it wants to be closer to that kind of dark, gritty thing that Zack Snyder is doing. But it doesn't kind of get that. I mean, you can't do what Zack Snyder's doing like that on TV, I don't think. I mean, his stuff is so dark and so grim and so life-destroying that it just is not going to make it on television. So the show sort of, from its very beginning, has a kind of, it doesn't know what it is. It keeps sort of going back and forth, like Meredith was saying. And I just, it's not very satisfying for that reason, and it's not really what you want out of this show. I mean, you find yourself asking, like, why are there all these sort of crazy super villains? I mean,
so not being satisfying, I think, is the number one thing I noticed while watching it, because I so badly want it to be Gotham Central, which is the comic that John mentioned a little bit ago, which was this comic written by Ed Brubaker and Greg Rucka, and it is the hard-nosed police procedural comic book that I think the show wanted to be, but for whatever reason they insisted on shoehorning the Bruce Wayne origin into it. I'm not sure the details of the production of this or the development of this show. Gotham Central asks the question, what is it like to be a police officer, to try and uphold the law in this city filled with crime and corruption? And it focuses on a group of police officers. And that's another thing that bothered me about Gotham, is that it sort of suggests that James Gordon is the only good police officer in all of Gotham.
Right, and I mean, we've seen in the movies, and I can't attest to the TV show, but there are corrupt cops in Gotham, and they do end up getting their own in different ways. So that's not to say there aren't corrupt police officers, but we'd like to think that there's at least one. We want more good ones.
Right, because if there was only one good cop in Gotham, then the city would have already descended into complete anarchy, and there would have been no reason for the supervillains, because it's hard to steal effectively in a totally, it's like Gotham would have become sort of Escape from New York, which it hasn't been. I mean, there's gotta be that core of goodness, even in dark, dirty Gotham, to make Batman or Batgirl or whoever a force for regenerating. If there's no goodness there to regenerate, then the hero story doesn't really make any sense.
Well, and I mean, Jim can't do it alone. He doesn't even have his mustache in the TV show. He's not powerful enough to do it on his own. He needs that.
Well, that's exactly right. And the show borrows several characters from Gotham Central.
Well, yeah, that's what Gotham Central does well, is that they're good cops. They're fighting against a tough system, but at their heart, they're doing what they can to uphold the law. And you do see a couple of these characters, Renee Montoya and Chris Allen, are in Gotham, not exactly the way they were in the comic book. And I think Renee Montoya is only in the first season.
Yeah, and you can kind of see sort of the traces of a really good idea that never really gets worked out in the show, and it's really unfortunate, because Gotham Central it's such a fascinating idea. I mean, one of the really interesting things about it is that the Batman character is almost completely absent.
Yeah, he just pops his head up at the end and is like, "Oh, hey, there's crime happening everywhere. Thanks for that."
Right?
Bye.
Yeah, he rescues Renee Montoya at that one point when the weird guy
Two-Face.
Two-Face.
Yeah, the weird guy.
Yeah, the weird guy.
Yeah.
Two-Face.
Two-Face is pretty weird. Takes her prisoner and decides that he's going to make her his wife or whatever.
They're just going to live underground together forever.
Right,
It's
yeah,
fine.
that's a thing that can work.
Oh, yeah. The best relationships are built off of that.
Well, apparently in Gotham, I mean, the bar is kind of low, but Gotham Central is so character-based. It's really an investigation of what these people's lives are like, what their motivations are like, and there's a little bit of that spills into the Gotham show, but it doesn't quite investigate the character. It sort of does this with Bruce Wayne. So it goes a sort of a way to trying to figure out like what is going on in his head, how he's coping with grief, how he's coping with the loss of his parents. But the story just never really bites in the way that you would want to, and you can never really see, you look at him and you think, how does this kid end up becoming masked supervillain stopper? I mean, you really like, he's just, he's kind of bummed out, and he's got a sort of like soulful, sorrowful, whatever thing going on, but it's just not it's not compelling in the way that you would really want, which, as you'll see, is really sort of the theme of everything we're going to talk about here.
Yeah, I typically like Marvel comics more so than DC. I read Batgirl, obviously, because Barbara Gordon is the patron saint of librarian superheroes.
We do love Barbara Gordon here.
Yes.
But Gotham Central, I think, is one of the best comic book series I've ever read. And it's just really disappointing that you have something that's so rich and has so many storylines and so many interesting characters, and who doesn't like procedurals? Like, you could have just made a Gotham procedural show with 6 different police officers, Law and Order Gotham.
I was gonna say, I think, like, every TV station's evening lineup proves that people really like procedurals, so there would be a market for it.
Right, and you've already got the sort of character recognition or the sort of name recognition with Gotham. You don't have to spend a lot of money with crazy special effects or whatever, and you can explore, what it is about Gotham that makes it, why do they need to have Arkham there? I mean, it's just not your average mental hospital. It's the mental hospital for the
criminally insane.
For the psychotically, powerfully criminally insane.
First of all, they seriously need to, like, rethink Arkham, because everybody gets out of that. Even in the comic, they're like, well, he'll be in Arkham for, like, a few months, and then he'll be back again. And I'm just like, oh, God, you guys really need to rethink that, because it's not working.
Yeah, you want to talk about the revolving door justice system. I mean, they can't keep a hold of anyone there.
Well, and my other question while I'm reading it is, like, why does anyone live in Gotham?
Right. Well, I mean, probably because the real estate values are so low that it's impossible to sell your house. Like, I'd like to move to Metropolis, but I've just,
I think they even mentioned that at some point in time. They're like, this isn't like fancy Metropolis. This is Gotham. We have bad luck here. And I'm like, yeah, you really do.
Yeah, my house has been on the market for 18 months here, but I just can't get anyone to buy. Having talked Gotham basically to death, poor show.
I knew I was gonna hate it the second that they did a slow motion pearl falling when, like, the necklace rips. Yes. If you've talked to me at any length of time, you'll know that I hate that motif that they use. And I think they used it more than once in Batman v Superman.
Oh yeah, they did. There was like 2 flashbacks with the pearls.
Right, with the slow motion, like, drop of pearls on the ground. And I think it's a plot point in the pilot of Gotham. That's just one of the things that I was like, okay, yeah, this is not for me.
The Batman franchise from DC has gone through so many iterations that, it's not surprising they're kind of looking for something new. I mean, Batman's a character that's been going since 1931. Batgirl, who we're going to talk about in a little, originated in 1961 under the name Betty Kane. I actually, until I sort of talked to you about this when we were getting ready to do it, didn't realize that Barbara Gordon as the Batgirl character didn't turn up until 1967.
So while we're talking Batgirl here, let's transition a bit, because about 2 weeks ago they announced that Joss Whedon would be directing the Batgirl movie. And on the surface, I think good, because he's proven himself to be able to handle these tentpole movies. He's a guy who has a history of creating female-led projects. But once you think about it a little bit more, Marilyn's got some feelings. I'm just gonna let her go.
I was really excited for like 2 seconds.
Yeah, that's basically how I felt too.
And then I think I came downstairs and I talked to you guys, and I was like, I've thought about this for more than 2 seconds, and I'm actually not as happy about it as I thought I would be. Not because I don't think that Batgirl can carry her own movie or anything to that extent, because I love Batgirl and I'm very excited about the idea of a full-length live-action film that'll be in theaters, but just not Joss Whedon. Just not him.
Joss Whedon's feminism is really rooted in the 90s, I think, and he's got this weird fascination with strong female characters, but he has this need to tear them down and depower them and break them as a way of exploring the depths of human despair or something. I don't know.
So when they first announced it, I was like, oh, okay, Joss Whedon, Batgirl, okay. And then like an hour later, it came out that he was going to be going with, or at least the talks are, that he's going to be going with the new 52 version of Batgirl and the Gail Simone run, which, if you know about that, pulls from The Killing Joke, and it's after she's recovered from her injuries and she's out fighting crime again and dealing with PTSD and survivor's guilt. So it's very, very, very dark. And that fits a lot with DC's movies, and it fits in with their general theme and tone. But as someone who loves the character of Batgirl, I feel like that's not a good representation of what her character is. So I was very disappointed to hear that. And then, like 5 days later, he was asked about it on some red carpet, and he said, she came up and I started getting obsessed with how a young woman could get hardcore enough to need to put on the cowl. Like, what is her damage? And I was like, oh, there's the word, damage. He loves that word, damage.
Right, and it's the central thing with Joss Whedon characters. I mean, I think you, Meredith, made the exactly correct point about this. And, okay, just as a side, if you're wondering what's going to happen in the future of this podcast, we're going to devote a long time to a discussion of the problems of Joss Whedon's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but we're not going to go into that now, except to say that Joss Whedon, once again, is also going to be doing this in the context of the sort of DC movie aesthetic that's all about, I mean, it's not just women getting torn down, like this whole thing in Batman v Superman where Ben Affleck opens the crypt door and gets sort of vomited on by some black bat or whatever, and that's just, you know, it's just, can't anybody just be happy for 10 minutes? Like, it just doesn't, you know, and this is just not what we want out of Batgirl. The Batgirl sort of does best in those moments when she's sort of brighter, a sort of brighter alternative to the stew of human misery that Batman so often turns into.
And the New 52 version of her character did some really odd things, because the New 52 supposedly wiped everything prior to 2011, out of continuity, except The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke being the non-canon story of Barbara Gordon getting shot by the Joker and paralyzed, and at that point, you know, she was in a wheelchair and became the character of Oracle and joined up with the Birds of Prey, which is a whole separate thing. And then they wanted to bring Barbara Gordon back as Batgirl, because before that, Stephanie Brown had the mantle of Batgirl and had her own solo series, a good solo series, but DC wanted to bring the original characters back, but didn't want to just make her Batgirl, so they kept The Killing Joke, added this weird, she got experimental brain surgery in some foreign country, and then was fighting as Batgirl, but also still oracled in like the few years. It was very, very confusing.
Well, and maybe you guys can answer this for me, because I don't really have an answer. Why is that the only thing that they take out of The Killing Joke as being canon? Like, we're not going with the Joker's backstory in that, or what you would want to call his backstory. They toss that around however they feel like it, which is, in some instances, part of his character, because he's all over the place. But we're also not taking, like, the end scene that can be argued as to whether or not Batman killed the Joker, and, like, why is that what they always take?
Right. I mean, this is The Killing Joke, for those who don't know, is a freestanding story that was done by Alan Moore in 1988. And there's a kind of interesting sort of timeline here in the respect that in 1986, Alan Moore did Watchmen, and roughly at the same time, or just sort of slightly before, Frank Miller did The Dark Knight Returns. If you know anything about comics, you know that Frank Miller and Alan Moore loathe each other with a passion that fadeth not. And I think that Alan Moore sort of decided that he wanted to do... So The Dark Knight Returns, the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns, which came out in February of 1986, was a sort of literary naturalist take on Batman, where it's dark, Batman's old, he it's not just the sort of biff bam pow fighting. I mean, Batman breaks the bones of his opponents. In a way, it's a sort of throwback. Actually, another thing I discovered in doing the kind of background for this was that the original Batman in 1931 quite often killed his opponents, and the Batman from The Dark Knight Returns doesn't kill people so much, although he comes very close with the Joker. The Joker, he breaks the Joker's neck, and then the Joker eventually manages to kill himself. But it's this very dark, very grim. I mean, the Joker at one point in The Dark Knight Returns poison gases the entire audience of the David Letterman show and a whole troop of Cub Scouts, and I think that Alan Moore sort of wanted to do a similarly dark thing, but what he came up with was this extremely horrible story of the Joker shooting Barbara Gordon. And in fact, Alan Moore has since repudiated the story.
But it's something
it doesn't fix it.
Right,
and
yeah.
it's something they will not let go. So Gail Simone took over the Batgirl run in the New 52 for the first 34 or so issues, and I swear, every third issue, they would flash back to the Killing Joke, and you'd see him wearing the Joker, him wearing his Hawaiian shirt.
Right, it was anytime somebody took out a gun, which was a lot because crime and guns.
Right.
And she would have flashbacks, which makes sense if you went through something that was that traumatic and life-altering, you would have flashbacks. But it just took over the story.
So, after about 34 issues of the New 52 run, Gail Simone left, and they brought in a new team to write and draw Batgirl. It was Brendan Fletcher, Cameron Stewart, and Babs Tarr. And they wanted to take Batgirl in a new direction. They called her Batgirl of Burnside. They moved her to the Brooklyn version of Gotham. And they really wanted to explore really Barbara's origins, the pre-Killing Joke Barbara. She was a college student. She was a librarian. She had friends, things weren't just terrible for her, and it was probably one of the best runs of Batgirl to date.
It was very reminiscent of Year One, if any of you guys have read that, which I cannot sing enough praises for. I love that one, and honestly, I wish they were going with that for the movie, but that's another thing. But it was bright, the colors were bright, the story was bright, there was optimism, there were friends, there was happiness. And it was wonderful.
They did a lot of interesting things. She uses social media, and they build that into the story in ways that are really interesting. And it's not just this dark, grim, I just to get back to the Killing Joke for half a second.
We'll never get away from it.
Well, right, yeah. And the evidence of this is when they decided to do a new animated movie, and what was the central thing in it? The Killing Joke. Oh my God! Who wants to see that? Who does not actually currently draw a paycheck from DC wants to see more of the Killing Joke? And it's frustrating because clearly, this change in the New 52 when they brought in Babs Tarr and everybody was so much better, so clearly what the series really should be. I mean, because if for no other reason than if you're going to have these sort of female cognate characters of sort of already existing characters, it can't just be Batgirl just shouldn't be like Batman in a dress. There needs to be something specific about Batgirl, a specific kind of story and a specific sort of thing that you're telling, because otherwise it's just, why are we here? Except to see a woman get shot. I mean...
Well, one of the things that I think it was Cameron Stewart was on a panel, and he was talking about writing Batgirl, and he said one of the things that they realized very early on in their run of Batgirl Burnside was that little girls read this comic, and for a lot of them it was an introduction to superheroes. And he said we really had to think about the fact that she was Batgirl. And I think that's so important, and what a lot of people miss is that Barbara is a girl in the sense that she's a young adult. She's not hardened like Bruce. She got into this because she wanted to help people and because her dad said she couldn't be a police officer. She is an optimistic and positive person, and she makes the best out of every situation. And to just slap on a dark blue filter and be like, there you go, that does not represent the best qualities.
And I just have a lot of concerns about Joss Whedon already talking about exploring her damage.
Right. Not everybody on this earth is, fundamentally messed up in the way that, and that's the thing, okay, there's superheroes, and there's got to be some sort of motivation that gets them out of the kind of normal way of human beings living their lives, but it doesn't have to be that your soul is crushed from some horrible thing. Maybe it's that you have this kind of Boy Scout motivation, or Girl Scout motivation in this case, where you want to make the world a better place, and you want to do it in a way that's outside the sort of, you're not going to go work for UNICEF, like you're going to fight crime in the mean streets of Gotham City.
You can't use your ballerina skills at UNICEF.
Well, that's true, I suppose.
And another thing Stewart and Tar and Fletcher tried to do was reverse the Killing Joke.
They tried.
They tried so hard. They had a villain that was implanting false memories into Barbara's mind, and they suggested that the Killing Joke might have been one of these false memories. And that was the end of their run, because at that point, DC started this rebirth. It allowed them to restart the comics that had been canceled or that were selling badly, but it also allowed them to keep the ones that were doing well, like Batgirl. They didn't have to wipe everything that had come before it. So Hope Larson took over writing Batgirl at that point, and the first issue she did Killing Joke right up on the page.
Immediately.
I just could not believe it. I was like, are you serious? Like, is someone insisting that this be there? Like, why can't we get away from it?
I swear to you, I have like nightmares of like the Hawaiian shirt and even Jared Leto. One of the first things he did when they were like, oh, he's the Joker now, is the first thing he did was recreate that iconic
cover of the Killing Joke with the camera, yeah.
And that's what makes me so worried that that's what they're gonna focus on in the movie, because they already have their DC Universe Joker who's making reference to it. Just pull it right on in.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it just absolutely will not die, and there's so much other interesting stuff. I was so hopeful when I think you actually passed to me the Fletcher Stewart Tar New 52 Batgirl that was exactly what you want it to be. There's so many things in this world that are almost really good and are close to really good ideas, but don't quite make it. You shouldn't get the impression that we're like bitter, angry people that just hate on everything, because, we read a lot of comics and we have sort of, I think, maybe elevated standards.
I feel like when you have enough of something, like, there's gonna be a lot of bad stuff. And so it's easy to talk about it because there's a lot of it, but there's so much that we enjoy.
Right. I mean, the fact of the matter is, you keep reading Batgirl comics. I see you in the office reading Batgirl comics, and I read them too. I mean, I read that whole sort of 4-trade run of Batwoman, which had some good points too, when she wasn't, the whole sort of supernatural thing was de-emphasized a little bit. But so what do you guys think about, so there's 2 rebirth things going on right now,
yes.
And why don't you talk a little about what those are?
Well, you've got the standard Batgirl run, but then they've also done Batgirl and the Birds of Prey, the New 52 Batgirl having been canceled before the rebirth started, so they brought this back. And it's a little weird. I think the Batgirl story technically takes place before Batgirl and the Birds of Prey.
Yes, because she travels the world and then comes back and has stuff that she's dealing with.
Right. So Batgirl and the Birds of Prey is Batgirl, Huntress, and Black Canary. So it's typically what you think of when you think Birds of Prey. Birds of Prey having started the main run. I'm not sure if Birds of Prey was created by Chuck Dixon in
1995. I think it
1995. I don't know if there was some iteration of it before that, but he did Birds of Prey with Barbara Gordon having at that point become Oracle because she's still in the wheelchair. I think Oracle started in Suicide Squad, though.
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. So he created this team of Barbara Gordon as Oracle. She's sort of the computer mastermind, and Black Canary is the muscle. And he wrote that series for a while. Gail Simone, again, her name's come up here a bunch, took over the run in 2003. And she wrote for about, I don't know, 60 or some issues. I've read most of that. She was the one who introduced Huntress, so she's the one who can be credited with the Black Canary, Oracle, Huntress version of the team. They made a TV show, which I thought... Yeah, this is really funny. They're laughing because a friend of mine and I watched this series, which was from 2002. It aired on the WB as almost a Smallville spinoff, but like not really. And I was under the impression that it was based off of the Gail Simone run, but it actually predates most of it. It's got Dina Meyer as Oracle, Barbara Gordon Oracle, Ashley Scott as Huntress, and Rachel Skarsten as not Black Canary. Black Canary played by Lori Loughlin.
Yes!
Let's not forget.
Lori Loughlin.
But they made a bunch of very odd choices that I would almost be like Gotham-like. Like, I'm not sure why these changes were made in the series. Like, why make Dinah a psychic and not Black Canary if you're making a Birds of Prey show?
I don't really know. I don't have an answer for you.
There's nothing about it I would recommend except Dina Meyer. Dina Meyer is the most incredible Barbara Gordon ever. So if you love Barbara Gordon and you love Oracle, I would say maybe watch this show.
Do we have it here?
Yes, we do have it here.
Oh, okay.
We have it here on DVD, so if you're a really big fan of Barbara Gordon, or Dina Meyer, I guess, go ahead and watch Birds of Prey. Otherwise, I really can't say much by way of recommending it. The new Birds of Prey comic book, which is written by Julie and Shauna Benson, is, again, your standard Barbara Batgirl. That's the difference.
Yes, it's Burnside Batgirl. She's got the new look and everything.
Yeah, it's Batgirl, Huntress, and Black Canary. And Huntress has a weird origin that I don't necessarily think we need to get into, because I think it depends what Earth you're talking about.
Yes,
right, and there's definitely more than one. Because
the Huntress of the TV show was the daughter of Catwoman and Batman. The Huntress of the Rebirth is the Helena Bertinelli, daughter of a mafia boss. Also agent of Spiral, if anybody reads Grayson.
Right.
So I just read this trade this morning. It's okay. It gets better. I read the first one and I didn't like it because they spent a lot of time arguing, but...
Yes, they did. And that kind of killed it for me. I had purchased the first couple of issues and I had to say, you know what? I have a lot of other stuff I buy. We're going to say no to this.
So the main arc of the first few issues is who is Oracle, because someone has taken over the mantle of Oracle and they don't know who it is, and this has disturbed Barbara very much because she's the one who created Oracle when she was in the wheelchair in between being Batgirl for a year, the Killing Joke, recovering, and then being Batgirl of Burnside. And so they're searching, and this Oracle character knows many secrets, and they need to figure out who he is, or who, sorry, that's a spoiler at the heat. It's a Batgirl fanboy named Gus Yale. I'm not sure if that's someone from something I haven't read, but they want to find out who he is because he knows all of their secret identities and everything. So it's okay. I'm a little annoyed about the fact that Frankie, who was Barbara's friend, was supposed to be Oracle.
Yes, she was set up perfectly to be Oracle because a lot of people, Oracle means a lot to a lot of people. She was a very visible, disabled superhero, and she was very important to DC. And the putting Barbara back as Batgirl upset a lot of people because they had this great representation, and then it was just taken away for the sake of making Barbara Batgirl again. And we could argue whether or not that was a good idea. I don't want to get into that. But in the Stuart Fletcher Tar version, they set up her roommate Frankie perfectly.
Frankie, who has a disability.
Yes, she is very tech savvy. She had made the app Hook that we mentioned earlier. Hook. I always read it as Hook. And then she just wasn't Oracle, and it was heartbreaking.
They kept teasing it, saying that her code name started with the letter O, and then it was revealed it was Operator.
They even put her in the Batgirl suit at one point in time because she was like trying to prove that she could do stuff.
And
which she could.
I talked to Brendan Fletcher, co-writer of Batgirl, and he told me that she was supposed to be Oracle, that they had planned her to become Oracle, and then at the very last minute, DC stepped in and said, no, she can't be Oracle.
They were doing such a good job, they had such a great thing going, and I feel like DC kind of gets in its own way, and it's very frustrating as a reader and a viewer, because you can see the greatness, and you just want to, like, reach out and grab it. And nope.
Yeah, this is why I read mostly Marvel, I read some DC, mostly things that you've read and told me are okay. But it's for this reason. I mean, Marvel has its own stock of bad ideas, but Marvel, I feel like, with the exception of the X-Men, are pretty good at sort of moving on from things that have drilled themselves into the ground. Whereas,
I don't know, Secret Empire's kind of working to prove you wrong on that one.
Okay, fair enough. But by and large, I feel like, and The Killing Joke, not to sort of flog this dead horse again, is the perfect example.
No, we're gonna.
Yeah.
We are going to be very clear with how much we hate The Killing Joke.
Yeah, DC requires us to mention The Killing Joke every 3 minutes.
The problem with it is, the central problem, as far as I can see, is that you take a sort of centrally important female superhero and have her get shot, and then you just relive the thing over and over and over and over again. So it's not just the sort of catastrophic violence against a woman, it's the catastrophic violence that's just repeated and repeated time and time again. And, something you were saying earlier I think is really important, that, for me, reading comics from the time I was 5 years old, I constantly saw myself reflected. I looked at the characters in, like, the X-Men, and of course, I'm not, like, I don't have wings, obviously, but they're all sort of people that I could theoretically be if I had actual muscles, and, they're guys, mostly. The X-Men has its own sort of Jean Grey problems.
We do not need to get into that right now.
Yeah, nope. A morass that we won't explore, but, so it's important that comic book creators have, in the last 30 years, come around to the idea that comic book characters for women should be a thing, that you needed to have comic book heroes who were role models for girls and young women, and Batgirl was, I think, really at the sort of forefront of that. So the fact that they then developed this trope of her getting shot and then turn it into, like, Groundhog's Day, I mean, it really beggars belief. Like, why must you do this, DC?
Well, and to go back to the Killing Joke movie that came out last year, just for a second here, because I feel it is really important, because they tried to give Barbara a little more humanity in the movie version of it. The first half hour is dedicated solely to Barbara, and you would think, oh, that means they did a really good job with humanizing her before she's injured, which is an important thing, because in the book, it's just like, oh, she opens the door and is shot, and that's all we see of her. They tried so hard, but at the same time they didn't, because...
They failed so hard,
because the first half hour is just Barbara whining that Bruce is not taking her seriously, and that she can do everything that he can do, and in the meantime he's scolding her like a child and saying, like, no, you're going to get pulled into the dark side and end up killing someone because you're too involved in this. And then there's a creepy scene on the roof that I'm not going to go into for polite society, and at the end of the day, she's still being used to further Bruce's narrative. At the very end, we see her in a hospital bed, and he comes up to her, and he's just like, I'm gonna go get the Joker for you. Sorry, that's my Batman voice. Right. And it wasn't any better, and they had the opportunity to do better, but Brian Azzarello, apparently slightly creepy, and Bruce Timm seems to have some fixation on the two, Barbara and Bruce having a relationship, as he did in Batman Beyond, and it was just disheartening.
Of course, it also means, and this is the sort of subtext that runs through it, that Barbara has to be subordinate to Bruce, that she can't be a character in her own right who has her own motivation, does her own thing. It has to be sort of Bruce Wayne as the sort of gravitational center of the Bat universe that everybody has to sort of rotate around. And
it doesn't. We saw that in the Fletcher Stewart Tar Run. She was doing everything completely on her own, and it was great, and we occasionally got Nightwing was coming in and saying hi, but we were free of Batman, and I loved it.
Right. This is the thing that they need to do, and this is why Gotham Central is so great, because Batman is principally absent, and what you get is the attempt to fill this hole, the attempt to complete what that world is like without the fixation on Batman and his sort of psychotic motivation to beat the stuffings out of every criminal he can get his hands on.
Especially because, oh geez, we have so many Batman comics. We're not lacking for Batman at all. If you want Batman, there's plenty out there for you to just soak up. So I do enjoy when we get away from Batman and he's just kind of on the outskirts of the story, like you said with Gotham Central. For example, with the Joker, because he does come in Gotham Central and there's a whole story with him and shooting people. That's how I can handle the Joker personally. He's in there for one case and then we're done. He's not this huge focus of like a dozen comics and a story arc. And no, I like this where he's just a problem that they're trying to solve and then they're on to the next case.
Yeah, I'm glad we circled back around to Gotham Central because I don't think I fully articulated how much I love the character of Renee Montoya.
You didn't, please go on.
I want to talk about Renee Montoya just for a hot second here. So she's one of the main characters of Gotham Central. I would say it's her and her partner Chris, and then there are two other detectives, and they tend to rotate cases. So one couple of story arc will be about Chris and Renee, and the other one will be about Josie Mack. So Renee's got a bunch of storylines in this series, and one of them is called Half a Life, and this is probably the most famous storyline from the whole series. It's won, I think, an Eisner, it won a Harvey, and it's just one of the best stories. And she's this tough female police officer working in Gotham City, which we've already talked about being crime-addled, and she's written by Greg Rucka, who never met a female character he didn't like to have punch someone or drink a bottle of liquor.
Right.
Yeah, I'm gonna interject and say, like, if you like Greg Rucka and his tough lady characters as much as I do, I really do, I'm gonna go ahead and recommend Lazarus, which we do have here at the library.
Yeah, Lazarus is excellent, and it really seems like Greg Rucka and Brian Michael Bendis are involved in some weird competition to create, right? Yeah,
three of them
to create the most hard-nosed female character in all of comicdom.
Yes, and I love it because Renee looks a lot like Forever from Lazarus because it's
drawn by Michael Lark.
Yes, and he does both of them, and it felt so comfortable and familiar, and I was like, oh, I just love this. Yeah,
so Rucka really does a good job with creating these really tough female characters, which is what I like to read. Like, I like to read. I don't want to say damaged is not the word that I want to use because we've just taken Joss Whedon to task for it, but they're complicated. You know, they're not.
They live messy lives.
Exactly, perfect. That's exactly what's happening here, and it's really explored in Half a Life, and later on in Corrigan and Corrigan 2, which are the other two storylines that have her front and center. And she, throughout this whole series, sort of starts as this police officer and is faced with these repeated setbacks with just crime bosses getting off on technicalities and supervillains kidnapping her and, you know, corruption in the police department, and you get to watch her slowly descend into darkness, like right on the line, which is what Harvey Bullock had done before her. She was his partner before he got involved in some bad stuff and became an alcoholic or whatnot. And then at the very end, she quits. She doesn't let herself go over the line, and she just throws her hands up and is like, I'm done with this. I'm not gonna cross the line, so I have to get out. And it's just really amazing to watch. And I know that it doesn't get explored in the way it should in Gotham, the TV series, so that's a huge disappointment because I would really like to see Renee Montoya. And they've almost recreated her in Supergirl in a weird way because the character of Maggie Sawyer is almost Renee Montoya, but not quite.
Right. They used another character. They used the name of another character
who's in Gotham Central.
Right. But they made her Renee Montoya. I think there must be some sort of contractual reason with DC and Fox versus the CW.
So I don't think that we'll see Half a Life play out in Supergirl, but the character is almost there also. So, you know.
Yeah. All right. Final thought. If you could design the Batgirl series that would be the one that you really want to read, what would it look like?
For me, it would be Year One, but with Babtar's art, because I can't get enough of her art.
A recreation of Year One with Babtar?
Or an extension of it, yeah.
I like that.
All right.
So, I love Barbara Gordon, but I have to say my favorite Batgirl is... Marilyn's laughing at me again. My favorite Batgirl is Stephanie Brown.
I get it. I'm not like making fun of you. I get it.
Stephanie Brown is the hapless Batgirl. If Barbara is the brains and Cassandra is the brawn.
I was gonna say the muscle, all the muscle.
Stephanie is the bumbling one.
The bumbling, adorable one.
And she's been made this intelligent hacker character in Batman Eternal. And that's not really the way that...
She's street smart.
Yeah, she's a street smart kid. They've been conflating Stephanie and Barbara, I think, their character traits in the New 52 and this Rebirth. And Stephanie is really, she's the daughter of a villain, like a really crappy, like C-level villain. And she's from, you know, the wrong side of the tracks kind of town. And her mom's addicted to pills. And she's like the tough, street smart Batgirl. And that's what I'd like to see, because she's my favorite.
Yeah, we could get more of that. That'd be great.
All right, well, I think that's all we have time for today.
Wait, what?
What would you do?
Yeah.
What would I do?
Yeah.
To be honest, you know, I don't have a great deal of imagination, and I relate to this character a little differently than you guys do, for reasons that probably don't need to be explained, but I really wish that they had gone on with the Fletcher Stewart Tarr version of Batgirl. I thought that the tone of that was so much better, and it really was a story that I was interested in seeing continued. They just seem to always want to kind of boomerang back to the Batgirl as like dark, damaged, messed up human being, which is just a tired storyline.
Oh wait, one last thing. I'd like to see Barbara actually graduate from library school, because
goodness.
it's only a 2-year program and she started it like 6 times since the New 52 started.
I have to laugh because I think it was in the most recent issue of Batgirl. She's like sitting down doing her graduate homework, and she's talking about like doing a library program, and she's like, we could get the you know, like 20-something guys in with craft beers and having a night at the library. And I was just like, you're never going to finish this degree with that attitude.
Yeah, dude, soon you're going to get your PhD in library science, and then you'll be in trouble.
So yeah, if Barbara could just finish her library degree, we would be very happy.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah?
Yeah, thanks.
No Talking in the Library is a production of Mentor Public Library. Opinions expressed are those of the presenters and do not necessarily express those of the library or the library board. You can find our webpage on the library's website at www.mentorpl.org/adults/no-talking. Our sound editor is Marilyn Wiest. Our webpage is maintained by Mary Pelton.